This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH. Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, the agriculture battle in Ukraine continues and a new sharper focus on farmer mental health. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekend broadcast. Mr. Pearson here, along with the other old guy. How are you doing, sir?
I am well, Max. Good to see you.
We had a big week this week. A crop report came out with a surprise. In fact, you said nobody's expecting surprises. That means there will be one. You were right.
I was indeed. Smaller crops than expected by a lot of analysts, reported by the USDA earlier this week. Max, We'll talk about it here in just a minute.
There might be one challenge weighing on farmers. There are many, to be sure, and we've been talking about farmer mental health. FMC Corporation is going to put it in a sharper focus. FMC is coming forward with a mental health program. And over the next few weeks, we'll be talking about this. On a month-to-month basis, we'll talk about what's going on, what we need to know about farmer mental health. Lisa Homer is a communications director with FMC. She sat down with me the other day to talk a bit about this.
You get people who are uncomfortable asking for help for anything, because you were brought up to be able to manage it. You help other people, but you certainly don't ask for help. And then you add on top of that the stigma that can come from mental health and what people think about it. It just makes it doubly hard for somebody in that arena to ask for help. But it also makes it hard for the people who could see somebody who they feel like they need to offer the help, and you're not sure how to do that.
Lisa Homer, FMC's Senior Communications Director, will join us next week. We'll explore this topic in a little greater detail. And those of you who get Farm Futures magazine, that should be arriving on the rural route soon, and there is an extensive section on rural mental health. So stay with us as we talk about this in the weeks ahead. Well, out there in the field, one thing that showed up in the crop report the other day is what's happened with diminished yields in the western part of the Corn Belt and the Plains states this year. That dry weather sure has taken a toll. I talked about that with Katie Strathman, and we shared the visit in our Plan Smart, Grow Smart series. Talk about the geography you serve and the growers that you work with there.
So I cover the eastern 2/3 of Kansas. I go as far west as Dodge City and then go all the way up to the river where it borders Missouri. We're a pretty hot and dry climate, but we always do get some foliar disease later in the season.
Is it sometimes a little bit difficult to convince the producer that there could be a disease problem and they need to address that from a plant health standpoint?
Because we don't always see disease, when we do see disease, we're often behind the 8 ball. Typically, disease shows up and people are surprised and they wonder, is it going to stick around? Should I treat? Should I not? I know that I can confidently talk to a grower about a BASF plant health fungicide that, as the name implies, is a fungicide. It controls fungal diseases, but also provides added plant health benefits that, independent of disease pressure, can help plants handle conditions that are the opposite of those that cause disease. Typically, disease is cool or moderate and wet, and stress for us looks a lot like hot and dry. And that's something that our plant health products can really help find a balance for.
Being able to see the difference, talk a little bit about that. What growers see, Katie, can they see the difference in their fields?
Absolutely. I'm not going to say that every time you apply a plant health product you see that difference right away, but certainly when plant health does show up in more than just yield, it is astonishing. I have seen fields of corn that were split, treated, one receiving a plant health fungicide, one receiving no treatment, and the plant health treated plants will be green, full leaves. I've seen fields that were treated following a hail event that actually, as the crop started to regrow, ended up in a significant height difference.
So quite often untreated, you see in that plant, it starts to power down prematurely.
It absolutely can. So a plant, while it might be bred to produce yield, it isn't intrinsically designed to yield. It's still designed to survive. And when we have those stressors that signal the plant that the season is going to get cut short and they just need to survive, that's when we start to see yield tip back. But with a plant health product, we can help alleviate some of those alarms and keep the plants operating more normally, helping to preserve that yield potential even in those stressful conditions.
In this 2022 season, what have you seen there among your growers in Kansas and the fields that they farm?
It's honestly been pretty interesting because, as we've discussed, Kansas isn't always a haven for disease. But this year we saw some diseases that were more typical of maybe Iowa geographies. I had a lot of people calling me, long-time trusted agronomists, saying, oh my goodness, I'm seeing what I think is northern corn leaf blight for the first time. It just leads into a good conversation about why it's so important to get out and be proactive with a fungicide application. Absolutely, now is the time to try, because you should know that even if you don't get that disease, you're protected from it, but you're also going to help that plant utilize its resources better.
We enjoyed the visit with Katie Strathman. In our Plant Smart, Grow Smart series, you can see more and other visits we've had at PlantSmartGrowSmart.com.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit FirestoneAg.com to find your local certified dealer. And it's time to take a look at the markets. Joining us this week is Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. And Clayton, we saw the World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates released this past week from USDA with a little bit of a surprise there in the soybean market. It dropped that yield down substantially.
That was a surprise, Mike. I mean, those reports, they always deliver some kind of surprise, it seems like. But I tell you, from talking to our customers, it seemed to us as if the bean yield had a good chance of rising, really. I mean, so many people seem to be really pleased with their yields and so forth, but afraid not.
They brought it down. Harvest, of course, is ongoing. Clayton, you mentioned you're hearing good reports from your growers. How is harvest proceeding for this time of year?
It's going pretty fast. I mean, it's not that often you see so many people almost done with beans, and many of them haven't started corn yet, or they've just barely started, that kind of thing. But in East Central Illinois, though, things are moving along pretty well. I'd say more and more people are getting close to being done with the beans, and maybe halfway done in the corn kind of thing.
Clayton, on the bean front, one of the stories we've seen develop over the past 2 weeks are low water levels on the Mississippi, concern ahead for exports. We saw that reflected in USDA's number a little bit. Do you think we're going to see a bigger cut to exports ahead?
I think we're going to have to, for several reasons. I mean, that definitely hampers the whole flow. It's going to take a hit. Obviously, we can go out P&W or whatever, but it does, throw another roadblock there. But that just kind of exacerbates the situation where, China has made it clear that their needs are less, and then you have just cheaper product in the rest of the world too. So, they had that Argentine soy dollar program, whatever you want to call it, and that definitely finally wrenched some soybeans loose out of the Argentine farmers' hands, and that bottom line is going to come right off our exports in all likelihood.
Clayton, you mentioned the cost of U.S. ag products on the global scene largely as a result of a high U.S. dollar value. Any chance we could see that come down in the near term?
I keep thinking we're going to. I mean, people keep talking about the pivot and that kind of thing, and then you look at that CPI report that came out Thursday morning. Once again, the CPI number was higher than expected. They trashed the bonds, made new lows on that move. The dollar shot up. The dollar hasn't made a new high yet, but it's within striking distance of it now, which would be a 22 or a 20-plus year high again. So, so many people are looking for that pivot. It's hard to take Janet Yellen and the Fed chairman. It's hard to take them at their word because you're just so used to so many people kind of saying some BS, and you got like looking for the hidden message there or something. But well, I'll tell you, get these numbers, and these guys, there's just a parade of Fed governors every day, it seems like, going out there saying, no, we are not going to pivot. So this is one of those times when I guess you better take these guys' words at face value.
Take them at their word. More interest rate hikes coming as the Fed battles inflation.
That's what they're saying. I mean, probably 3/4 of a rate hike in November, and maybe the same in December now. I mean, they seem intent on whipping this thing.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the wheat market. This is another place where U.S. exports have been struggling. Clayton, do you see some opportunity for U.S. growers to grab more of that market?
Yeah, not so much, really. I mean, every once in a while we're competitive, but more often than not, we're not. And that being the case, I mean, this whole Ukraine thing, I have kind of a little different view on that. Everybody thinks that when you see all this turmoil and Russia being more aggressive and so forth, it's, oh my gosh, this is bullish because it's going to blow up the Black Sea. I think there's a real good chance that the opposite take is the more correct one, in that if and when Russia does have total control of that, they want to export that wheat more than anybody on earth. And whether it's their own wheat or the wheat they're stealing from Ukraine, either way, they have all the interest in the world to get that stuff shipped out, and they will. I mean, you keep hearing these stories about, the shippers can't get their boats insured and stuff like that. They'll figure out a way, in my opinion. So I don't know. I just think that that supply is not going to be sealed off from the world, period.
That's a very good point. Russia's going to want to move it if they have control, and that will push it out onto the global stage.
Exactly.
We're
Crude
talking
oil, too, really.
Absolutely. We'll pick that up when we return. We're talking markets with Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. Welcome back. We're talking markets with Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. And Clayton, just before we left there in that first segment, you mentioned crude oil. Certainly been on the minds of a lot of growers with the price volatility over this past year. Crude's down under $90. Are we going in the right direction?
Boy, they've been whacking it pretty hard lately. I think crude is just another example of how the world marketplace in a number of commodities, crude chief among them, but cotton too, the market's very satisfied with what is an extremely tight carryover. I mean, we all know there's plenty of crude reserves all over the world, U.S., Venezuela, wherever. But the bottom line is, even with the bottleneck we have in refining capacity, it seems as if the market is satisfied that there is enough. And it seems like we're kind of flirting with danger here the way we keep draining this strategic petroleum reserve, the SPR. We keep taking this down to decades lows. But the market doesn't seem to really care, and I think, we are maybe driving fewer miles and that kind of thing, but it just seems like it's the world has become comfortable, and we've seen this before over the years, with sort of a just-in-time inventory approach is good enough.
True. That's a good point. You mentioned crude oil there, thinking about the retail price of gasoline this past year. That high level drove a lot of consumers to ethanol. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're going to stick around? We're going to see ethanol demand stay strong.
Yeah, I think it's pretty steady. Its overall fluctuation is relatively small, I guess is what I'd say. So I think it's in kind of a tight range of ups and downs, and I don't see enough of a change for a need to increase the line item on the balance sheet, that kind of thing.
So the USDA 50 million bushel drop in ethanol demand, that seems pretty reasonable.
I think so, and maybe you see another 50 million drop, but I don't think anything dramatic in the short term.
Okay.
Longer term, boy, you got to worry. All these, the governments are just intent on ramming these EVs down our throat, and who knows where that's headed?
Who does know? That is a question. Clayton, thinking about the USDA report this week, they dropped ethanol production, 50 million bushel, raised feed consumption, 50 million bushels. Clayton, where are we getting more animals?
That's a head scratcher, I got to say. I think sometimes, kind of like the seed, feed, and residual in soybeans, the feed number in the corn balance sheet is sort of like the wild card. Or you can kind of sweep what you want into and out of there, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to cushion the blow a little bit.
Okay. On the supply side, Clayton, we did see another yield decline, not entirely unexpected by analysts. Does it fit with what you were seeing here across the country?
I thought the corn number would actually be up a little bit too, because for so long in the early harvest results we kept hearing how my beans look great, and the yields are coming in fine, but the corn I'm not so sure about. But I got to say, almost unanimously, let me take that back. Some of the southern states definitely got hit hard on corn, but the core of the Midwest, the I states, more and more people seem to be really proud of their corn numbers too. So I was surprised that thing went down too.
Clayton, we're going to see corn exports come back here in this next year?
I don't think so. They lowered the corn exports by 125 million bushels, and they could go another 50 or 100 the way things are. And we have seen a glimmer of a life, a pulse in the export scene this last week. We saw a couple of days of flash sales, but those were all soybeans, to China and unknown destinations. But corn is conspicuously absent.
All right, we'll be watching for that in the future. Clayton Pope Commodities, thanks for joining us.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Well, before we get into the technology segment, I just want to point out that every time I upgrade my phone because of Colby, it takes me probably 3 days to get squared away. Apps disappear, they don't work well. He doesn't talk about that.
That's true. You got to put in that work when you get some new tools. And Max, I've got a feeling Chad might have a new way for you to spend some money next.
I would imagine so. Let's check in with Mr. Colby this week to see what is on his mind.
The technology in our cordless tools today is a little overwhelming. That's kind of no secret. The air impactor, as you see right here, is something we've actually featured on the tech segment in the past. 150 pounds of air pressure right there in that compact design. That thing is super handy on your farm or ranch. And if you've upgraded any of your hand tools like this 3/8 Impact, you realize it's a huge upgrade from one from maybe 2 or even 3 years ago. This has drive control on it. That's using the technology on board that allows you to have different modes of the tool. So maybe you want it to do lightweight work, or maybe you want to make sure you don't over tighten anything, or you simply need maximum performance. I could tell you this, if you upgrade any of those tools today, you'll notice a substantial increase in power as well. Now, in my ecosystem, I use Milwaukee tools. You can see there's a single battery blower, there's weed trimmers, we've talked about the chainsaws. These things are great. But the nice part is it just utilizes the batteries I already have, the M18 battery. That's the best part. And you knew all this was leading up to something. Here it is, the brand new Milwaukee dual battery blower. Now, even when I was a young man, we had gasoline-powered blowers, and they move so much air, they're super handy. And I know a lot of guys that use them literally every day blowing off their combine, and they work great. And the reason why we still use them is because they're so beneficial in terms of moving volumes of air that the first cordless blowers just weren't powerful enough. The single battery blower is just that. It doesn't have the punch that you really need to move a lot of air. Now, this dual battery one, that's a game changer. 600 CFM, I think airspeed is upwards of right at 150 miles an hour or close to it. And let me tell you, when you pick this thing up and pull the trigger, you know you got a hold of something. So especially this time of year when we're blowing off combines, or maybe you've got leaves in the yard, or you want to blow out your shop. As far as the price point goes on this tool, I know they are available. This one was $300 is what I paid for it. And, you know, to me, as long as it can perform what it's replacing and do a better job, that's what it's about. And this one will certainly outperform those old gasoline-powered blowers we've had in the past. And Max, just to warn you, there's a brand new chainsaw right around the corner as well, and I can't wait to use that as well.
Well, I don't think Chad said, when you put both those batteries on there, I think that's 11 pounds or so. That's a heavy-duty tool.
It is a heavy-duty tool, Max, but it is Fire Prevention Week, and it looks like a great tool to keep those combines a little cleaner.
There have been a few fires out there in recent days for sure. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. It's a crucial part of our transportation system in the United States, but one we take for granted so often until there's a problem. And we do have a problem now on the lower Mississippi River.
We do indeed, Max. Some of our grower audience might have noticed that basis bids at river levels have come down over the past several weeks. And a lot of that is because barge freight on the Mississippi River has hit a record high. It has eclipsed the past level highs of 2012, the last time we saw this low of levels on the Mississippi. And it doesn't look like there's any relief in sight. I was speaking with Mike Steenhoek at the Soy Transportation Coalition. There's no major weather events in the forecast that could bring these levels up as harvest really moves into full swing.
The lower water levels on the lower Mississippi River, now that's south of the lock system. The result is that channel becomes shallow, it becomes narrow, and they can't load the barges as heavily, and they can't have as many barges lashed together in one tow out in front of that boat going down the lower Mississippi. And what percent of our corn market moves into the export channels through New Orleans? I think it's close to 60%, isn't it?
I think you're right. It's substantial on corn, and it's also substantial on soybeans, even though a lot go out through the Pacific Northwest.
One thing they can do is to dredge the channel, and they've done that to get some relief. The Army Corps of Engineers will go in with the dredges, and they can dig it out a little bit, and that can provide some relief, but it tends to be very temporary.
It is. And Max, I'm glad you brought that up. They have been hard at work. The Army Corps has been aggressively dredging. There are several low spots and rocks in the river that were creating some of the immediate challenges. They were able to get some broken up. In fact, here about 4 or 5 days ago, there was an announcement about 2,000 boats were able to move south of Memphis for the first time in about a week. It was positive movement. It was positive news, but the concerns are still there. And Max, when we talk about these barges being filled less full, we talk about these barges not moving at all, that pushes that grain into other transportation arrangements, and it's not nearly as efficient, is it?
You can't take up the slack with trucks and with rail cars. In fact, I want to share this with you. Take a look at this graphic that we have. One barge is the equivalent of 16 jumbo covered hopper cars on the railroad. One barge, And then, if you're talking about semi-trucks, 62 semis are needed to haul the equivalent of one river barge. First of all, we don't have the truck capacity. We don't have the truck drivers. But just think how crowded the roadways would be if we had to dump that out there in trucks. The rail capacity is taxed now, to be sure. We're not sure what could happen with a labor challenge on the railroads. We really don't have a great alternative there. It was kind of interesting. In one of the drought years back in the 80s, one of the big grain companies bought into a percentage of a railroad. I think it was the Illinois Central Gulf. They bought like a 15% interest because they were concerned about not being able to move grain down to the Gulf of Mexico. Roughly, the Illinois Central Gulf, which is now Canadian National, parallels the Mississippi River going down to New Orleans. It's the route of the city of New Orleans.
That's right. That's right.
Made famous in song by Arlo Guthrie.
Arlo, that's right. Yes, indeed.
We old disc jockeys remember that stuff.
Yeah.
But one other thing to keep on your radar screen, if we don't get some water relief soon, first of all, that river system starts to freeze.
Yes.
And it'll begin to freeze up to navigation, starting up in Minnesota, not too many weeks from now. And then once everything closes down, then you've really got a challenge as well, and the inability to move grain.
We do. And indeed, Max, the problem isn't just moving grain. We've been talking about the impact the farmers are going to see here immediately in harvest, but the impact of these low water levels will extend into next year because so much of that crucial fertilizer needs to come up these arteries, and those barges can't be filled. And Max, you touched on some of the statistics of these barges, and the challenge here is we have entire barge tows being reduced. No longer are we pushing 35 or 40 barges down the river at once. These low water levels have limited it to 25 barges in a single tow. That's almost 50% capacity.
I hopped on a towboat a few years ago. We were, I believe, shoving 35 barges down the lower Mississippi, 5 across and 7 deep. And it was really interesting because it was a drought year. I had gone to sleep in the quarters down below. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard this pounding noise, and it was logs bouncing up against the bottom of the boat. So I was awake, I put on my trousers, and I went up to the pilot house where the captain was sitting there navigating the lower Mississippi River. He took us under the Vicksburg Bridge, and I'm thinking, you know what? This is very close. This isn't the wide waterway that you really think it is. And you looked at the depth sensors. They had them up on the front of the barges, and I'm sure the technology is so fantastic now. It has to be light years of what it was back then. But when you looked at the level, the depth of the river at that point, and how narrow the channel was, you realize this guy sitting there at the controls is really earning his keep. And you got to remember, there are boats moving the other direction. We were meeting other tows. And so they would pull around and try to watch for all of those shallow spots where there might be a missing buoy out on the river and try to accommodate others as well. It's not easy work.
It's not, and I tell you, those drivers have been struggling extra hard. These low water levels have meant they cannot get close enough to the shore in some cases to get those grains loaded, which is, again, creating more challenges at loading facilities. Max?
I think they're taking out a gas pipeline somewhere like about 80 miles north of New Orleans, and that's another temporary closure that I've been hearing about. The Army Corps of Engineers estimates that the river system adds about $1 a bushel in terms of the price for the corn growers, simply because of having that ability to move.
Wow.
So that's the challenge we see right now in terms of transportation. But we'll keep that one on our radar screen, along with many others here in the weeks ahead. And Greg Solier will be watching that for that rain that could come along, or snow that might make a difference in the river levels. He'll be along in the next part of This Week in Agribusiness.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. This past year has been a year of turmoil, and farmers have been some of the most impacted. Max, I know you recently had the chance to sit down with a friend of yours and talk about the assistance he's brought to those farmers who have been in trouble this year.
In Ukraine, as a matter of fact. Our old friend Howard Buffett, farmer, businessman, philanthropist, has been trying to make a difference with his Howard G. Buffett Foundation in Ukraine, providing assistance to those who farm there, sending equipment over there, and other needs during a very, very difficult time. Howard himself has been there 3 times since the war started. And in an RFD special, RFD TV's Rural America Live, I sat down with Howard for a few minutes and talked about what's going on there and what he's been doing. When you were there, were you not concerned about your personal safety? I mean, many of us sitting in our recliners, at home and watching this played on the screen, and we're thousands of miles away. We can't begin to imagine going into that part of the world. How did you do it and feel reasonably safe?
Max, I had a great experience when I was 14 years old. We had a Czechoslovakian, Vera Vatskova, who was a student exchange with us. And in 1969, Russia occupied Czechoslovakia, but she invited any of us, my brother, sister, and I, to come over. My mother was adamant that I was not going to go over there. She said, that's crazy. You're a 14-year-old kid. You'd have to get on an airplane by yourself. You're going to a country occupied by the Soviet Union. And one day I asked the question in front of my dad. He was reading a newspaper. I saw he put the newspaper. I remember where he was sitting on the couch, and he put the newspaper down, and he said, Susan O, that's what he used to call him. I said, Susan O, let him go. It'll be a good experience for him. And I'm like, yes. And so I go to Czechoslovakia when I was 14. It was an amazing experience for me. I had a lot of things happen to me that were a little nerve-wracking, but you're landing in Prague and you see all these tanks and all this stuff. And as a 14-year-old kid, you think, wow, this is kind of cool. You don't understand the impact. You don't understand the implications and the consequences. So, then the reality hit. I walked up to give him my passport, and there's these two guys standing there with now today I know they're Uzis, but I wouldn't have known what they were then. And all of a sudden I thought, what if Vera's not here? What happened? I mean, and the reality hit me. So I went through that process at 14. I watched people beat by secret police. I was there when I didn't see this, but I was there when the monk burned himself. I mean, like all these things going on, and I couldn't appreciate all of what that was when I was 14. But then I went on to do some more international travel, and then I went on to Bosnia, and I just learned that you have to show up. I mean, for us to understand it, to see, people suffering, to smell the smoke and the stench of when you're walking through these buildings that have been bombed out, you don't forget those things. You forget them if you read them, you forget them if you see them on TV. You don't forget the faces of people that you watch die. So, my motto is you have to show up. And so we do that. I mean, I've been hitting a helicopter with a PKM round, and lucky we didn't go down. I've had guns put in my chest 4 different times in Africa. I always look to see if the finger's on the trigger, and twice it has been, and that makes you very nervous. So I just believe in, there's a risk in it, but I never think about the risk. And so if I want to understand what's going on in Ukraine, and if we're going to invest heavily in the humanitarian side, you got to do it quickly. I mean, they need help now. And so, to help farmers now, I got to go over there and see it. And I'm a hands-on guy. So, I got to show up. And so I don't think about the risk.
In terms of farm equipment that you've brought in over there, give us a feel for what has been done by the foundation thus far.
Well, kind of the fun part of this is that all of the equipment that we were able to source. I went to Deere and I went to New Holland, and I said, I want to get all the equipment that you have on the European continent that you can deliver now. And all of that equipment turned out to be equipment that was originally slated for Russia.
Oh, seriously?
And
so you disrupted
yeah,
that?
So we took all the equipment that was slated for Russia, and we were able to bring in a number of combines, a number of tractors, and they've been working, and they're spread out all over the country. You do what you think you need to do at the time, and so we supported farmers getting the harvest out, and I met some of those farmers, and they're going to start on the corn harvest pretty soon. And it's storage, it's transportation, it's equipment, all the things that have been damaged one way or the other, or affected one way or the other. But they're going to face, they have huge issues with storage. They're going to have huge issues with getting grain out of the country. This is going to be a big problem for a lot of countries around the globe.
Howard is also a photographer, a very accomplished photographer, as a matter of fact. Some of the images from his trips there were taken by himself personally. We'll share more just a little bit later on in this weekend's broadcast.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
More than a few of you with crops still out of the field would be wondering, okay, what could come now? Will there be anything damaging that crop out there? Let's pursue that question. Greg, what do you see this week?
Well, I think the weather of last week across the heartland, the wet weather, was of benefit for some of those drier areas of the Corn Belt, but not the vanguard, not the start of a pattern shift to wetter, so still plenty of opportunity out there. But there's expanding dryness and drought over many areas of the Corn Belt, especially east now, mainly into the west, and building again into areas of the Pacific Northwest where it's a warm, dry scenario for outdoor work and the last of winter wheat planting. A little boundary here separates some of the early winter-like cold that played out a few days ago across the plains versus a delightful go of it. Maybe some at least near record-setting highs across sections of the Mountain West. But at the same time, we've been keeping an eye on the fire situation, still ongoing in a couple of spots, Rogue River Basin, Willamette Valley, and there's not a lot of action going on. Maybe a little more wind, a slight cool off in temperatures for Big Sky Country, a couple of flakes of snow and sprinkles of rain, Canadian Prairie, and a stray shower for the Dakotas. That's it. It is largely a dry setup across the northwestern quarter of the country for this week. Meanwhile, a couple of weather systems up aloft making their way into Southern California, the desert Southwest. We saw that about a week to 10 days ago. Some pretty good rains through New Mexico and West Texas. And here is the next feature coming into areas of the Imperial Valley. So some shower activity here. Not much going on across the Plain States areas. More rain certainly needed in that heart of the winter wheat belt. So one little system into West Texas, cotton country, maybe a sprinkle and a snowflake left over across New Mexico. And another system comes ashore into Southern California. Not a big moisture maker, but at least a couple of showers and otherwise a nice weather pattern for outdoor work through the valleys of California.
Well, take us down through the heart of the country, right through the center of the nation. What do you see?
Yeah, we've had kind of a November, early December feel and chill, and it is still here across the western Corn Belt, effectively ending the growing season. Some of these mid-20s all the way down to the Ohio Valley. And looky here, it's the season's first significant snow for upper Michigan, parts of the northern Great Lakes region, into areas north of the St. Lawrence River Valley. So cold, a hint of winter in the air, the feel of the same, but there are at least milder days moving back into the plains and western Corn Belt. A rush of wind as well with some good drying where you need it coming off some of the rains. About an inch, by the way, last week into parts of central Illinois. Note the absence of any widespread moisture should be able to go forth with harvest operations across the Corn Belt. Here's a couple of those southwestern weather systems. Much cooler, drier air all the way down to the Gulf Coast area. A nip and perhaps some frost as well noted into parts of northern Oklahoma. But by the middle and late parts of the week, warmer, drier environs. Not the greatest of news with the need for moisture, but outdoor work looks pretty fine. Cleanup and recovery coming off the recent spat of hurricane weather across Florida and points northward from there.
In the eastern part of the country, we sure have seen some drought improvement, right?
That's right, eastern areas, but across sections of Illinois, for example, southern reaches expanding there, northern reaches, some improvement here last week. West, again, forget about it. Look at the flakes of snow off Lake Michigan into Michigan. Snows will blanket areas north of the St. Lawrence River Valley, but good coverage rain where we need it into the northeast of New England with colder to cooler, drier air, some frost potential into the Delmarva here for the middle and late parts of the week, but milder, drier environs across the western Corn Belt. Opportunities for harvest there. Some showers and thunderstorms, still some dry issues despite the hurricane season across the mid-Atlantic region down through Florida as well. But again, it's a quiet setup from the Delta into the southeastern states as we move on through the middle and late portions of the week.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
To see some improvement in that river transportation system on the lower Mississippi, there needs to be moisture. We'll check with Greg here to see if there's going to be any widespread moisture coming over the next few weeks. It's going to take a while to turn this around, isn't it?
That's right. We're probably weeks away from getting that pattern shift into significant moisture. We've seen it with temperatures, but even that will reverse. But we're kind of in this predicament coming off the month of September across the continuous U.S., the driest September since 1956. So, and it's not going to happen overnight, as you pointed out. It'll have to be a pattern shift, but it's a La Nina year. That means better organized snows here, upper plains areas, northern plains, and across parts of the Ohio Valley. Maybe we'll get a little trickle-down effect with time. Anyway, this week, quarter to half in the southwest, scattered across the Gulf Coast. Lake effect moisture in a system early in the week could bring significant snows north of the St. Lawrence. Not much going on moisture-wise in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, looks like good weather for state fairs. Texas State Fair is going on yet. North Carolina State Fair, my little International 404 is there at the fair in Raleigh. All right, let's take a look at the warmth. Any warmth for the week of the 24th?
Not really over the eastern areas of the country here. Look at the shot of cool and cold and maybe some early season frost, mind you, all the way down into Dixie. Temperatures recover again into the western Corn Belt. Here is some of the warmth over the western parts of the country where there's some good news. Hopefully we get this pattern shift eastward, but parts of California, the Pacific Northwest, northern and central Rockies to pick up on moisture opportunities. Oh, don't rush it, don't push it for outdoor work and harvest operations over many areas of the Corn Belt.
The week of October 31st, how warm?
That cold is retreating, and here comes the warmth, maybe near record setting over parts of the heartland. So a fine feel all the way to the eastern states, lingering into the Pacific Northwest as well, where moisture begins to expand there. Northern and central Rockies, plain states, all the way down to West Texas. Still plenty of opportunity for harvest into the eastern Corn Belt. Still dry as a bone across the Northeast and New England.
The week of November 7th, what do you see?
From a temperature standpoint, pretty comfortable here over the eastern half of the country, but note the trough here, the bend, the buckle, and the cool to cold air pooling across the western states. It serves up this scenario, so here's your timetable. Let's try to get it done here by early to mid-November. An expanding area of moisture, hopefully helping out the streams and rivers in the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio valleys. Dry time across the eastern states. Yeah, we can put a tropical system in the western Atlantic, even in November. Moisture, too, is of great benefit into the Pacific Northwest.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
In Max's Tractor Shed this weekend, more auger tractors. No green ones this week. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store Lock Tool Cabinets. You heard the expression, you rock? Well, they don't rock at Store Lock. They don't rock, they don't wobble, they don't wiggle. They're rock solid. Go to storelock.com. Well, we have some red ones, a couple of good red ones in Max's Tractor Shed this weekend. Hard working on the auger. First of all, a 1976 IH 1466 at Miller Farms in northern Indiana. I believe that's Kosciuszko County there. And just a little bit west of Chicago, this 1973 IH 1066 is hard at work on Rue Farms. We've been there. A couple of great red auger tractors in Max's Tractor Shed. Well, let's find out what's crossing the block at Big Iron Auctions. Here's our pal, Mark Stock.
Hi, Max. Land is a hot commodity right now, and both Big Iron Realty and Sullivan Auctioneers are busy selling farmland. Dry cropland, pasture, irrigated cropland is getting attention from all types of bidders and buyers. Go to our websites, folks, to see the land selling in the month of October. On the equipment side, Big Iron will be selling a lot of machinery October the 19th. Big K Equipment from Duncan, Oklahoma will be selling Wacker telehandlers, JLG boom lifts, and mini side dump trailers. Francis Scott is retiring from Denton, Maryland. Check out his 1993 Case IH 1688 Combine, his Case IH 7120 two-wheel drive tractor with only 4,284 hours. He's got a John Deere 6330 mechanical front tractor with a loader, 26 items altogether on their retirement sale. S2E2 LLC out of Grand Island, Nebraska will be selling some Tempty Super Hopper grain trailers and a 2003 Peterbilt 379 semi-truck tractor. Over 1,100 items selling on October the 19th. Max, we're filling up fast for our November and December auctions of both land and machinery. Go to BigIron.com and SullivanAuctioneers.com for more information on how to sell your land and equipment.
FFA students across the country no doubt are gearing up to assist with harvest on operations, and several of them are still in school. Joining us now is Emma Kubal. She is the new president for the Minnesota FFA. Emma, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Emma, what are you excited about looking out to this next year as the president for the Minnesota FFA?
I've really enjoyed everything that we've done so far. Coming up, we have National Convention, which is going to be a really awesome experience for us all to have. But I'm most excited for chapter visits coming up. I'm excited to work with the students in their home schools.
Emma, you mentioned National Convention is coming up. Are you excited to get back there as a leader?
I am. It's going to be a whole different experience for me this year being a delegate.
Emma, what was it that prompted you to try for a leadership position in the FFA?
I started in my chapter leadership position when I was a sophomore in high school, and I really enjoyed it. And my sister was a region officer in Minnesota. So I decided to try for region office, and I ended up getting region president. And then after that, I was able to work really closely with the state officers, and I decided to run for state office because they encouraged me and they helped me so much through last year.
That is fantastic. And now you get a chance to do that same role with the other students in FFA. Emma, in the meantime, you're in school. What are you studying? What's in the future for you?
I'm currently attending the University of Wisconsin-River Falls for agriculture education, and I hope to become an ag teacher.
All right, going to pay it forward. All the good experiences in FFA, you hope to recreate it for more students.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, Emma Kubal, president of the Minnesota FFA, thank you so much for joining us now, and we wish you the absolute best of luck as this year moves along.
Thank you.
Welcome back, folks. Earlier in the program, we talked with Howard Buffett and saw the work he's doing getting equipment over to Ukraine. But Max, that's not all his foundation is involved in, is it?
Oh, he's been sending equipment and dogs to try to find some of the mines that have been left over there. He's providing so much assistance to farmers. But one area that he's looking at is a very interesting one. Is it the possibility that they could track down and hold accountable for war crimes some of those who have come down and dismantled Ukraine's agriculture industry?
One of the more interesting things we're doing is we immediately reached out to a woman we knew that had worked in The Hague with war crimes previous to this war, and said we'd like to be able to provide her funding so that she could support the Ukraine government in their effort. And so she got started on that, and then she came back to us and said, look, there's a lot of activity around war crimes and documentation. What if we document the impact on agriculture in terms of how it would fit in the category of war crimes?
Really?
And I had never would have thought of that. And I said, absolutely, that we should be doing that. So she's documenting the theft of grain, the destruction of grain infrastructure, the stolen tractors and combines from farmers, all of the impact that this Russian war has had in terms of however it affects farming and agriculture, she's documenting. And she'll document the amount of damage to farmland, which is significant with these bombs that have been dropped into all across the area, the farmers that have been killed, the damage. And I'll tell you what, the farmers will find this story pretty interesting. So we met with a gentleman who is involved in a grain company, but he's also a farmer. He farms about 1,000 or 1,500 acres. He was telling us a story. He's about 2 hours south or southeast, something like that, of Kyiv. He was telling us a story of how he was on the farm, and as the Russian occupation started, they came up through that area and they set a command post up on his farm. They started butchering his animals to eat. They started amassing ammunition. They started bringing in some artillery. And when there was just this, I mean, he could see he's already lost his farm. I mean, so he got away from the farm and called the coordinates into the Ukraine military and said, you got to bomb my farm. I mean, can you imagine doing that? I mean, I can't imagine calling the United States military and saying, here's the coordinates of where I'm sitting. Here's my combine, my tractor, my animals, bomb it. But he did it because he knew the importance of it in terms of the war. And that is not an isolated example. I know another individual who did the same thing that we read about originally and then communicated with. So the loss, and he said to us, he says, I have no insurance on the tractors. I have no way to replace my animals. But he said, this is what it was going to take for us to win this war. And so the commitment of the people, but especially the farmers. I mean, these farmers are still out there in fields, in some places risking their life trying to get a crop out. And I've seen many pictures, where somebody's cutting wheat and they come up on this unexplored ordnance. And of course, they laid many landmines as they retreated. So this is going to be a long, long haul.
One thing when you visit with Howard Buffett, as I've learned through some 3 decades that I've known him, is passion for the cause, whatever it may be, and especially in the area of agriculture, always shows through. Our special thanks to RFD TV and President of Rural Media Group, Patrick Gotch, for making that opportunity available to us and making it available to the audience. It'll be playing a few times through the rest of October on RFD TV.
Definitely worth watching. Eye-opening to that situation happening on the ground in Ukraine.
It is. Thanks for being with us here. We'll see you next week. So long.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.